Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Here we go. That's what I say every podcast. Welcome to Paranormal Karen. I am very excited today. This episode, I know that I set you guys up and I told you about the 5 people, the 5 most interesting people who are going to be frequently referenced and frequent guests, reoccurring guests. And this gentleman I have with you tonight, I put him in that category. One of the most interesting people I've ever met. We're going to get to know him. He does museum restoration, right?
Museum conservation.
Conservation. Yes. By the way, people are probably already used to the fact that a lot of my podcast is spent me looking for the correct word. Today in yoga, I couldn't remember what it meant when a guy had one eye, and I spent 10 minutes thinking, is that a centipede or a Clydesdale? It's actually a, what is it? One eye.
The third eye?
The third, no, just one of them. A cyclops.
Oh, a cyclops.
Yes. And then the yoga teacher asked me why I was thinking about that. So we spend a lot of time on this podcast waiting for me to try and find my words. So we have he's a museum conservationist, paranormal investigator, and the guy that I go to when I have any questions about the paranormal. People call me with their problems, and I send them to Dave. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Dave Harvey.
Can I do that with my problems?
Yes, you can.
People call me, I can send them to you?
Yes. I'm like
that way the universe is in balance, finally.
I'm the middleman. I don't
And 5 of the most interesting people?
Yes.
Is that counting my past lives?
Well, you get one.
I get one, okay.
And they're all in there.
I was just wondering.
And then we got Sonia and Dave, and the list goes on. But Dave, I want to start. Tell me, because I find that before we even get into what you do, like how you got into the paranormal, I am so fascinated. You worked on the Titanic.
I didn't work on it. I was called in as an outside expert to examine.
After it had already been raised and not on the way down,
Well,
right?
no, Titanic's never been raised. They pulled artifacts off the boat. And the situation in the early 90s was that, the Titanic was discovered by Dr. Robert Ballard in 1985. It sat there. He went back to check on it a time or two. And then a for-profit salvage company went out and they dove on the wreck with Russian submarines that they rented. So there's the Russia angle now.
Always.
Collusion. But they actually lifted artifacts off the ship, documented it on video, and then they sailed into Norfolk, Virginia, which is where the Admiralty Court, the Court of the Seas for the East Coast of the United States, is there. And they put everything into an international warehouse, just dumped stuff into water, left it sitting there in a hot summer, and while they're pursuing their court case, so they could claim the wreck for salvage. Eventually, a year or two later, they were granted the wreck. So they own all the artifacts on the Titanic.
Wow. So now, wait, who owns all the artifacts?
This was Titanic RMS. They just went bankrupt this year.
Oh.
So they're selling the artifacts.
Really?
Yeah, but they're the ones who basically put on these big traveling exhibitions of Titanic stuff. The one in Vegas, and they've traveled to stuff all over. So 2 weeks after the first things came off the wreck, I was brought in to look at them because they were having corrosion problems, and I'm a metals expert: silver, iron, gold, bronze, pewter, lead specialist. Objects made of that stuff that are either ancient or a couple hundred years old, or like the Titanic back then was 65, 70 years below the waves. So yeah, I got the amazing group of artifacts. The most impressive, you think something made out of metal is going to survive, right?
Yeah.
Anything made out of wood, usually the bacteria and the worms in the bottom of the ocean will
it crumbles.
eat that.
The
Right.
wood gets kind
wood's
of crumbly.
gone.
Yeah.
But things like leather were preserved, letters and diaries.
Really?
Clothing.
Wait, diaries? So the paper made it?
Yeah, the paper made it.
Really?
So they have letters people wrote on when they were on the ship right before it sank.
Wow.
One just sold at auction actually this week in England.
Wow.
A letter that was written literally 2 hours before it sank.
So this guy that actually the first guy that found it, was he looking for it or did he stumble upon it?
No, Robert Ballard was searching for it. It was an expedition with a French oceanographer. And then there was a little back and forth with the French, a little dispute with the French guy. There's always a dispute when you find something, right?
And always with the French
I just
guy.
remember that vaguely. But Dr. Robert Ballard just wanted, it's a grave, so he didn't want to bring anything up. He just wanted to, he found it, and he was actually, he's U.S. Navy. He was with Woods Hole's Oceanographic Institute back then. But he was also testing out brand new sonar equipment for the Navy, and that's what he was doing, was finding we'll find the Titanic. We'll take your new side scan radar and see if we can find it 2 miles below the surface of the ocean. Now,
and I know you're sensitive. Now, when you got to see these diaries, did you really feel anything with them?
No, because they were sitting in water, so I wasn't feeling them. And they were not storing things properly. So I was, a couple days later, I wrote like a 12-page memo to them about how to care for waterlogged artifacts. Because the thing is, when anything is buried in the soil or buried underwater, if it's a relatively stable situation where, someplace where surf is crashing, intertidal zone, you have a lot of changes. But that far down under the ocean, it's cold. There's almost no oxygen down there. It's like a big freezer, so it preserved a lot of the things.
Oh, wow.
The trouble happens when you lift those things above the waves suddenly, and they're saturated with chloride salts, right? Mm-hmm. The salty sea, right? So what happens is those salts start growing when they're exposed to the air, and they start drying out, and you get all these things can just literally explode within a few hours or a couple of days. So you have to keep them wet until you can eventually put them into treatment that will replace the water that's inside of them.
Wow. See, I dare you to find a more interesting friend than Dave right now.
But I did have one experience.
You did. You told me about this.
Yeah, I had one experience. So, and I actually touched one of the deck chairs of the Titanic. Uh-huh. The wood was gone, but the metal frame was there. So, it's been one of my ambitions. Hey, deck chair of the Titanic, yeah.
Oh, really?
They were intact champagne bottles with the cork still in them.
Wow. And you didn't get anything. You couldn't walk out with anything.
I have not really picked up things off objects very often, but I'm walking along and there's this huge sort of baby pool thing, like would be in a backyard for 12 kids, right? Uh-huh. And it had the blue baby pool vinyl liner, and there's this big metal armature sticking out of it. And it was one of the, they're called davits, and on these ships there would be two arms that held the lifeboats. Mm-hmm. And so they're pulleys at the ends. They're two triangular arms. And then you have a crank, and you crank the lifeboats down to the water. So this is one of the davit arms. It weighs 2 tons. They brought it up, and it's sitting half in and half out of the water, and it's rusting right where the water and the air
Okay, so the together. Baby pool was to keep it, sort of wet.
Sort of wet.
Okay.
So I reach out, and I touch it, and suddenly I'm not in the room anymore. Suddenly I'm staring. It's night. And it's almost like a movie scene where it's tilted about 30 degrees, and I'm looking at shadow figures looking at me. 5 shadow figures, and there's a bright light behind them. And the voice comes into my head and says, "Those are the women, those are the ones we left behind." No, those are the men, those are the ones we left behind. And then, bang, I'm feeling the cold on my hand and looking around at the $500 an hour lawyers right beside me.
Wow.
And I go, what the hell was that?
What is scarier, a $500 lawyer or ghosts? I don't know.
Well, actually, the lawyers ended up being scarier.
In the end, I guess so. Wow, that's really amazing. And did you feel their fear, or it was so fast and it was just like, this is where I am?
It was more like a message, like somebody, my hand touched the cold metal that somebody touched when they were getting on a lifeboat.
So it was somebody that maybe was trying to say,
I don't think it was active. I think it was more a message. I think it was an imprint of the thought of the person when they were getting on the boat.
Right.
Which is like, those are the men, those are the ones we left behind. And it's just like they're thinking that as they're grabbing this and then getting into the boat to hopefully live, right?
Right. Probably thinking this is surreal.
This was not sort of somebody. It was not a spiriting in a contemporary sense where they're in current time with you. It was more of a residual sort of imprint of somebody's thought at the time.
Right, like when you're looking at something that's so surreal you can't believe it, like those are the men we're going to leave behind.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that, and my vision of it was filtered through my mind unless there, I was, because, I'm sure the real life scene there would have been hundreds of people as you're getting on the lifeboat, you're looking at hundreds of people along that deck.
Right.
Right. So that isn't what I saw. I saw something more, abstract, expressionist version of it.
Everything's through an artistic filter.
Yeah, well,
that makes it much better.
Actually, the 1960 Star Treks were abstract expressionists because they didn't have money for sets, so they just used light and shadow. And remember, they had like little theater sets for
I kind of remember
their off-world adventures. So that's what it was like for me.
I know my friend Rich Scheidner always says in those Star Trek movies, it's clean as anything, but you never see a guy pushing a broom. Never a guy just sweeping up, but the whole place is cleaner than it's ever been.
What do you think they turned the Horta to?
The what?
The Horta, the big pizza creature that was made of silicon. That
did that clean?
Spock put his hands on him and said, "Oh, pain."
Oh.
And then they had to patch part of where he'd been shot with a phaser.
Oh, I didn't know what that
was. And the Horror was this underground creature that, the miners had disturbed it and killed its children, so it was protecting its children by killing the miners. And the Horta, but it was like a pizza creature on Star Trek.
Oh, but it swept up the spaceship?
Well, I'm thinking of the little Zumba things, right? It's a little round thing that goes around your floor. So I thought, well, this is a big round thing, like the size of a big turtle.
I don't watch Star Trek, but you took me the long way around that story.
All your Trekkie fans will get into the Horta, of course.
Okay,
yeah.
I don't know if I have any. Now, before we even get into the paranormal even more, you worked on the Mob Museum in Las Vegas.
Before it was the Mob Museum. It's the only historic landmark building in Vegas, National Historic Landmark. It's the old post office. It's a Beaux Arts building built in 1924, or I think 24 or 27, somewhere around there. And it was historically the post office, and then it's like a 6-story building, so the post office is on the ground floor. And then above that was the federal courthouse, and that's where the famous mob trials happened in the 50s.
And they do it as a film there. I went there.
Yeah, and that's where my favorite senator of the 50s was Keycoffer, who had the Daniel Boone hat, coonskin cap that he wore. And he had the Senate hearings there with the mobsters. And but the creepiest thing about that whole place was the post office part of it, because the architect took me down. And he went to this other door and opened it. It's like a little closet door, and you walk through, and it's a little. The walls were built a little extra wide, and so these are like little dark alleyways behind the walls, and they're little rectangular slits or slots. And so the postmaster could watch his employees.
Oh.
So he'd spy on them and make sure they're doing their job. So this went around in like a U shape, and it actually showed the showers and the locker rooms.
Wait, why are there locker rooms in the post office?
Well, because they would change in their uniforms there.
Oh, well, that's...
And they had showers, just like a high school thing. And so, but that was a creepy thing, that this guy could look through the slot and see people coming and going from the showers.
Harvey Weinstein,
and then the main part where the customers were, he could peek out, and it was all secret for him to be able to keep his eye, spy on his employees. Well, they didn't have CCD cameras. They didn't have security cameras back then, so...
Right. Yeah. But that's still... I didn't know the post office was so...
pervy.
Yeah, pervy. Yeah. Exactly. And you told me, because I went there and I was going to make a little Paranormal Karen, I got to be honest, I got a little bored.
You did?
I did. It was just a lot of guns and nicknames. I think
like Lucky. There are a lot of lucky gangsters, right?
A lot of Luckies that were dead. Not so lucky. But and when I do the Paranormal Karen, I go in and I look for the angle of the joke, and the nicknames was the only thing.
You should have asked me about the resident ghost in the place.
I know you told me about the one in the women's bathroom, right?
Right, who was a judge who hung himself in the 1970s, I believe is what we were told.
Right.
One of my we were doing an architectural investigation on the paint, so we're scraping down paint layers to find the original 1920 paint, so they could restore the paint to it.
Oh, that's right.
So we're doing. That's why we're there.
Now, that's when, even when people have a historical house, that's why it's a pain in the ass, because they really have to keep everything, don't they?
Well, not. There's no law. I mean, if it's a privately owned house, you can do to it what you want. If it's a national landmark house, if you want to keep your landmark status, then there's certain things. But they rehab landmark buildings into shops and stuff.
Yeah.
When we do finish investigations like that, we're looking for the original paint. So instead of scraping down, which you do sometimes in some areas, if you take like a electrical plate off the wall, the old paint will be underneath it because they painted over top of that.
And what does the old paint tell you?
The old paint tells me the color, and then we can take little use a scalpel and just take a little sample that you can cross-section and look under a microscope. So you'll see the wood, and then you'll see the layers adjacent to the wood and any layers, very thin layers on top, which may be glazes or different sort, something to give it gloss, treatments to it.
Wow, so. That's interesting now, but that's all lead-based paint, right? You wearing something to breathe?
Not entirely. The lead paints were very prevalent right up until they were outlawed in the U.S. Starting in the later 70s, 80s.
Yeah, so that could be...
So, yeah, there's lead in there, but lead paint's only dangerous if it's deteriorating, if it's flaking and powdering. Same with asbestos. If it's stable, you just leave it.
So if it's stable, you can eat it and be fine?
Well, no. You wash your hands and before you eat or talk or stick your thumb in your mouth.
And that's what they were worried about, little kids, is us eating the lead paint,
right?
Well,
like little kids still eat lead paint. There's lead paint all over America that little kids eat.
Really? I thought it but we're
How do you think Trump got elected?
I know. There you go, the lead paint conspiracy. Okay, so, and I think I have...
But anyway, I'm going to end this story quickly. One of my coworkers went to use the bathroom, came back, and she was just white. All the color drained out of her face. She was Australian, and she was going, there was a ghost in there. There was this thing in there, I saw this shadow, and nobody else was in there, and I heard this noise. And so, when our contact with the city, the engineer came by, I said, is there anything happening in here we need to know about? He said, oh, must be that ghost that judge who hung himself. He evidently lost something. His wife was going to leave him, or he lost money, and so he hung himself in his office, and then they found him, and
but
as we say, the rest is history.
Actually, it kind of sounds like it could be the pervy postman, though, too. Right?
That's going back in those little alleyways back behind the walls. That I got the feeling of perv back there. That was a really icky. Ooh, please, I need to wash my hands after this. Ooh.
That's okay. So here's when I was there. This is all I could think. I think I see Al Capone more than I see most of my friends. I have seen.
Really?
I'm telling you. So he's at the Mob Museum. I've been to Eastern State Men's Prison where his cell is. I used to stay when I was in Atlantic City. I stayed in, they put us up in a building that was Nucky Thompson's building.
What a great name, Nucky.
I know. I think it was really, it was something like that, but they changed it. It was an HBO series. They changed a little. Al Capone planned the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in the bottom of that building. I've been to the massacre in Chicago. And
the site of the massacre?
The site of the massacre.
The brick wall.
Right.
Right.
And and I've been to, I believe, what was his house. So I have been almost everywhere Al Capone, like all over. It's unbelievable.
Have you brought your recorder? Have you gotten any?
I have
Has
not.
Al said anything?
I haven't, but I think I will next time, and it'll probably
Have you done Alcatraz?
No, not
He was
yet.
in Alcatraz,
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Alcatraz, you can do an overnight there, I think.
I have an EVP from an overnight there that I brought with me, which we'll hear in another show.
Yay!
But, yeah, Alcatraz is, like, off the wall.
Wow. You see, now, do you ever feel like, this is what I feel like, there's 3 places I won't go. I won't go to Bobby Mackey's. I won't go to the Ben Lomond.
Bobby Mackey's, let's let our listeners know. Bobby Mackey's used to be like a roadhouse, right?
In Kentucky, yep.
Bands, and it's a bar.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, it was a slaughterhouse where thousands of animals were put to death.
And before that, it was bad Indian territory. Like there's a legend about that. It was the Indians wouldn't go there. Something about it. I can't remember. Tommy told me about it.
So it was cursed. It wasn't bad Indians.
Cursed.
It was cursed, and the Native Americans did not want to go in that area.
There was already demonic activity before it was even a slaughterhouse. So I won't go there. I won't go. People probably already heard the Ben Lomond, which is in Utah, and I won't go in the kitchen because I don't cook. Just kidding.
But she does make really wonderful quinoa, spinach, and peppers.
Spinach, and pepper.
I would say.
Yeah, stock up on your vitamin C and your iron at once. That's what that dinner was about.
And we both have a friend called Teriyaki, so there you go.
Yes, we do.
And by the way, she's in India, New Delhi, and they had their worst day of pollution they've ever measured there yesterday. I was thinking of her when I saw that.
Did you think it was her fault?
No, but it's hard to breathe there.
Oh.
It's like pollution that can kill you type of pollution.
Wow.
Like worse than China pollution.
Wow. Well.
And I was thinking, oh, poor Terry.
She looked happy in all the pictures.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Maybe it won't bother her. Maybe she's used to it.
So, Terry, I hope you're enjoying the show.
So, yes. So, and the other thing I was going to ask is Alcatraz. Is Alcatraz as bad as the other ones? Or no? Is it pretty much... Like, I think when you investigate these places long enough... I'd
say no, but there's... when I was there, I did it with... Bob Davis was there with his gang. There were about 25 people when we did it, but this was back in like 2010, I think. 2009, somewhere in there. Bob told a story that when he was a kid, he walked into one of the solitary cells that were open to visitors, and something grabbed him and slammed the door.
That's the one. I've heard about this.
Like 216, it's in D block. We investigated in there and got some recordings done. But there's nothing there that's going to... It's not as bad as...
Not follow you home?
No, I mean, the infamous former Wolf Manor in Clovis, California, up near Fresno, that's one of the worst places I've been in.
Oh, okay. And it's down now. It's done.
Oh, it's been bulldozed off and, it's gone. But that had definitely demonic activity. That my friend Tom and I did cases helping people for years who had brought the thing home with them, and it was scratching their kids and killing their pets. And
ugh.
Yeah.
See, now, which is now we're off on kind of a different tangent, but that's okay. I was one of the last I was in the last group that got to go in Linda Vista. And I always think about Linda Vista Hospital in East LA. It was always just a great, it just seemed like it was kind of open to a lot of ghost hunters. Everybody was in there. Ghost Adventures was there. I think Ghost Hunters was there. It kind of became famously haunted. And it was interesting that it's one of those, when you go into, for people that don't ghost hunt, when you go into these asylums or hospitals, it's almost like there was an evacuation. You walk in and there's files open as though the nurses had been working on something. There were desks with receipts on them.
And same with mental hospitals, old asylums.
Right.
There's part of that which I think has a great, it's going to be a big word, mise en scene. In other words, you've come across this scene.
No big words on this podcast. It's not
but there's a
acceptable.
sense of, oh my God, people just left.
Right.
Somebody
so you get walked in and said it's closed.
Because some of the old furniture is there. But the thing about Linda Vista is different is after it closed down as a hospital in the early 90s, because the city shut it down, it was used for film and TV shooting. So
right.
there's a prop operating room, and so you run into that stuff.
But there was parts of that hospital that it looks like the zombie apocalypse, because it looks like people got up and you got to go now.
Yeah.
And then what happened? It has some of the most fascinating stories of people losing time. That people go in there and they sort of lose time, and all of a sudden it's nighttime and they don't know what happened to them. I've heard that quite often there, but I always figured that was one of those places that was haunted-ish, not terrible, and then people went in with Ouija boards and all kinds of strange rituals, and then it really became dark. That's what happened with Wolf Manor. Wolf Manor was a sanitarium from the 1920s through the 1980s when it was shut down for patient abuse. And so a sanatorium is where people with tuberculosis would go. Right. And
they had this whole extension coming off the back of that building into the yard, which was also like a big patient area where the beds were. And they tore that down. And when they tore that down, they had a psychic come out, and she invited all the spirits. She opened some sort of vortex or a door and invited all the spirits to come into the house. And that's when things started going. But then one of the main people who hung out there a lot, investigated a lot, who spent years there, he also started doing some rituals in there, using blood. And that's when the heavier, nastier stuff started happening.
Started moving in.
Because it became a paranormal, the owner wanted to turn it into a paranormal attraction. It had been a haunted house in that area for years, a very popular haunted house. But then the city shut them down because of safety. And so, they need to put exit signs in, stairs in,
And it was pretty, from what I understand, by the time it was condemned by the end because it was so worn and he didn't keep it up. That's what I was told.
Well, he kept looking for financing for this to turn it into a huge hotel, haunted hotel. For people. So he was looking for millions of dollars to be invested in it, and he wasn't, it didn't even have power. I mean, the cool thing is it didn't have power in it when we were in there. So they had instances where the police would get 911 calls from the place, and the phone service, the phones are cut. So the police would come out and, no, the phones don't work here anymore.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so they were getting stuff like that happening.
See, and that's what I thought when Linda Vista, when I went in last, they had already, I think now they're trying to make it not senior centers, but...
No, it is. It was turned into senior housing.
And we were in the last building that was left standing, which was the main building, and the apartments were on the other side, and they had, it was not good. People were moving out quickly.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting because I also wonder there was one of the floors I went on.
It's like that former state mental hospital down in, it's near Oxnard. It's turned into California State University Channel Islands.
Not Camarillo.
Camarillo State Hospital. Where they turned the old mental hospital into dorms,
Yeah, I'm going to have Wayne Poe on to talk about his movie, which was great
he did on that. Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. And so they had, so when I went into Linda Vista, it's not even, and you really knew, by this time I knew the stories. I had seen some great visuals, evidence that had come out, some great EVPs, but also there was one floor where Rob Zombie had made a movie, okay? And it was literally, Rob Zombie makes a great movie, but his movies are really heavily dark. And I almost feel like it was all that energy in one place. Like it just kept collecting and collecting and collecting. And then it was out of control. They said in that building, they had Buddhist priests in there trying to bless it. They had... India, they had tried every way they could to get stuff out of that building, and it just didn't work. Now, if they tear down that building and don't put anything up, what happens? Do those energies stay? Do they move on?
Depends on the energies, because some energies are with the location rather than the building. Some energies are, in this case, I believe it's built on higher ground where there's a natural spring that runs under it. If there's a natural spring, then that can be a conduit. Like when we investigated several years ago in Virginia City, Nevada, which is one of my favorite places.
Yeah.
People were telling us, they were telling us the Washoe Club, where there's this infamous sort of demonic entity that's there, very dark energy, that's in this little alleyway just outside of the bar, of the club. But people were picking up on that same energy elsewhere in town. And so I did a little research and found out that they have natural, super hot geothermal springs that run through there because a bunch of miners got killed, scalded to death when they busted open this wall looking for silver, and they were sprayed with this 300-degree water.
Wow.
That kind of melted them. And so that runs through the whole town. So any energies like that can easily move underground through that system to any of the houses in town. And that's why people get the same feeling sometimes around town like that.
Wow, that's interesting. I also know they do a lot of crystal mining. That somebody told me that Virginia City, there's a lot of crystal mining. Is that true?
You get quartz grains, or quartz veins are where you're going to find gold and silver.
So between the quartz and the water, you've got a perfect storm.
Hey. Make a movie out of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I'm sorry. George Clooney already did.
Oh, yeah. Well, we won't steal the name. But so now we're all over the map. But I always find that interesting. And any of the stuff that I've listened to, because demonic is big. And as I go through the podcast, I'm going to do different shows on different things. So you got your regular human spirits, you got your demonic spirits, and you got a lot in between, which is really what fascinates me.
You have earth-based spirits called elementals. And so those are the ones Native Americans, if you look at Native American religion, It's all about sacred land, sacred mountains, sacred rivers. There were some places that were off limits to people because that's where sort of bad energies were. And so you'll often on investigations when people have stuff, there are not Native American graveyards under every house in America.
Right.
So let's put that out there.
Everyone didn't move the headstones.
And they didn't, Plains Indians didn't bury people. They, put them up on tripods and let the birds, dispose of them. I mean, so they're, anyway. But you do have these elemental energies that the Native Americans were associated with. So that'll sometimes turn up in a house investigation where that seems to be the motive cause of generating a lot of stuff. And often it's, these sort of elementals just not liking, people are you pave over stuff with concrete, they're going to get a little pissed because you've taken out the green, you've taken down the trees.
Yeah,
so.
and I want to do a whole show on elementals and a show on fairies. And
I'll get Tommy for that.
I know, I can't wait.
People always ask me where I get my crystals and beautiful gemstone jewelry, and I tell them I go right to GaiaSpirits.com. Gaia Spirits Gift Shop has everything from crystals to singing bowls, and they also offer readings, Reiki, gift certificates, and home blessing services that fit everyone's budget. My friend Robin Celine has years of experience with crystals, so if you're not sure what you're looking for, she is always right there to help. They even have crystal packages to help with house cleansings and getting rid of some of those pesky ghosts. I get so many compliments on my black tourmaline necklace Robin suggested for grounding, and so far I haven't floated away yet. As a special gift for my listeners, use coupon code ParanormalKaren and receive 10% off your first purchase. Again, use coupon code ParanormalKaren, all one word. GaiaSpirits.com, where I go for all my crystal and gemstone needs.
So before we move on to a story that you brought, this is just a tidbit too. In most of the stories that I've heard, whether they were books by the Warrens or whatever, when there's demonic activity in a house, it seems like the thing is anchored somewhere. That somebody has. There's always a place where there's stuff or there's a thing or somebody that placed a curse. That's where it is. Have you ever been familiar with that? Because I'm thinking somebody used that term. This is why it's anchored here. This is why it's in this house.
Not all the time. Spirit, ghost, or these kind of non-human spirits we're talking about can attach themselves to places. They can attach themselves to people.
Yuck.
And they can attach themselves to things, to objects. So like what was happening with the Wolf Manor is that a friend of mine called me and said, I really need your help. My boyfriend said, she had felt like she'd passed out, but she didn't. And her boyfriend said that her eyes had turned black, and there was a strange voice coming out of her threatening to kill him with a kitchen knife. And so I went over there, and we kind of investigated. It turns out she had frequented Wolf Manor a lot, and they gave her a bucket of the kitchen tiles from the place, and she brought it home.
Oh.
As soon as those tiles were removed, and a couple of pounds of sea salt poured over them, everything went away. That was the problem.
The first time that I saw a walk-on. Like, I'm not a death penalty person, but the first time I saw a walk-on where somebody was, I differentiate walk-on is when it's a human spirit, and then, whatever other things, but it's really like a different person, like this person becomes a different person. I really thought, I wonder how many people are in jail because of something like that. Like, they really didn't do it, or something took them over.
Being in this, because I do private cases a lot, I'll run a whole month or two where I'll get calls from people with mental problems, schizophrenia or paranoia. The guy who is recently homeless because he's had the same argument with 12 different people. So he was living with in his parents' house. He got thrown out. His wife threw him out. He lost his job. He's sleeping in his car, and the devil's talking to him to the radio. So. I find out if I ask, is anybody else experiencing this stuff? No, it's me. I'm the only one who sees it, hears it. Well, that's a sign. If only one person is experiencing the activity, then, it could be a mental thing, right? And then I was just like, well, why don't you just turn off the radio. So it's very, but the thing is, things like, there are several stages to a demonic attack. It starts out kind of gentle, and then it just takes root and gets worse and worse. And there's a stage called oppression, where somebody's really like, they're losing all their friends, they're getting into arguments with their family, they may be drinking or doing drugs, they're losing jobs, and there's this very oppressive feeling that's happening around them, and it could go into some mental things like depression, paranoia, they're seeing or hearing things, right? So that can mimic mental issues.
Right. And I've had that for some reason as a tarot reader, sometimes I get that call.
But the big distinction, what John Zaffis and my friend Tommy and other people who deal with these heavy cases, you look for things that will tell you that it's something that's more than what a person could do. So you look on, are religious objects being affected? Are all the crosses being bent and thrown off the walls? Are the Bibles being thrown into the fireplace or burned? And then the thing is, are heavy pieces of furniture being moved? And we're not talking a chair, because a human spirit can kind of move a chair a little bit, but we're talking about maybe a 200-pound bed,
bureau or something. Some of the I listen to a lot of Ed Warren's books, which man can he write a book, and his rule was always 2 pounds. If it's more than 2 pounds, and you know what I mean? Under 2 pounds, he kind of thought, well, that's kind of human. But his book about the real haunting in Connecticut was the most horrible thing I ever heard, and how that happened to that kid, and how it was amazing. It was almost like that story should be a study of what not to do.
Yeah.
Over and over and over.
For those who don't know that case, this was a house in the 1980s, I believe.
And it was a movie, very popular movie, Haunting in Connecticut.
It wasn't that good, the movie. It could have been better.
Right.
But basically, a family moves in. The son is living in sort of, the basement had been turned into a apartment room for him. And stuff was happening in the basement. The kid got diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
But it turns out...
He had it before they moved in.
But it turns out that the history of the house, it turns out that the downstairs had been used as a morgue in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of dead bodies came through there, and bad stuff happened downstairs.
People were having sex with the bodies, and and very strange. But it was almost textbooked that the kid was saying he was hearing voices, and other people, the parents were hearing the voices and saying, "No, you're not." Like it was just, it's everything you should never do, and it's just a pretty amazing. I don't know. That was the worst. I kept listening to that book. I listened to it on a long drive. I'm coming home from a gig, and it was like 4 a.m, and it kept me awake, but I had to turn it off. I was like, there's only 10 minutes left. This has got to get better. And it didn't get better. And then I turned it off, and then I said, it's got to get better. And it never got better.
By the way, those of you who have long drives to do late at night, Karen will have her top recommendations for books on tape for you.
Horrifying you awake. That's what I do. So, okay. Well, before we wrap this up, I want you to tell me, Ghost Story, give us the EVP, which I'm going to have you back because I love your EVPs. So now that we know who you are, this is one of the staples of the program, ladies and gentlemen.
Let me explain what an EVP is to the non-initiated. One of the activities or pieces of evidence that you can capture when doing investigations, and it's happened. People hear ghost audio or voices. It's happened for hundreds of years. Where in England they hear the wailing ghost, right?
Uh-huh.
Or people see their dead relatives at the foot of their bed and they have conversations with them.
I hate that.
So
I always say that's very rude.
So there are different classifications of paranormal audio.
Uh-huh.
So the one where you hear it at the time it happens. That's a disembodied voice. In other words, you're not seeing where it's coming from, but you hear a yes or stop or, it's a voice that doesn't belong to anybody who's around you. If it's just you, where did that come from, right?
Right.
So that's disembodied. Then an EVP stands for electronic voice phenomena. And what that means is that you've been using a recorder. They actually started with reel-to-reel tape, back in the 50s and 60s, and then they went to cassettes and then to digital media. So you're running a recorder. Sometimes you're recording over your phone. I've gotten them over the phone, too.
Yeah.
And it's a creepy voice that comes in, and nobody heard it at the time. but somehow it got picked up on the recorder.
And the interesting thing with the digital recorders is I've had EVPs that actually play backwards and sound exactly the same.
That's Karen's dating life right there.
Yes, it is. I play everyone's phone calls backwards to see if there's any hidden messages in them when I get a Tinder date. But that's how it it lays differently on the digital or something.
See, I haven't
like
done
that.
the backwards thing.
We had the best
I'm
one.
intrigued
It
by
was
that.
fascinating.
And then there's a final category of this audio, which is called ITC, or instrumental transcommunication. It's where you use a separate device where the voices come across. So people have like these little radio scanners that it's like some demon child in your car turning the car radio and flipping past AM
See,
stations.
that's my favorite piece of equipment.
And then you'll get voices riding in. Now, of course, I think these are little bits and pieces of the different announcers.
Well, I got but once when I was in Gettysburg, there was supposed to be a soldier, and we got nothing playing the whole thing. And it's that thing of which we'll cover in another show of asking the right question.
But I have a unique version of an ITC audio that came from my car radio that we'll play in the next show.
Oh, okay. And and I said, "Do you have a sister?" And that whole sentence was repeated across the radio wave. So it wasn't like a yes or no. It was a male voice that said, "Do I have a sister?" Like it kind of like they always say with EVPs, you want to kind of get something that gets the ghost emotional, and it was kind of like he remembered that he had a sister.
Yeah.
So we got the whole sentence, and that was
that's awesome.
Yeah, that was great.
Do you have that?
I think I have it somewhere in an old computer in a closet. I have it I'm terrible about keeping these things, but everybody in the room got it. Everybody was like, "Wow, did you
got to
hear that?"
let this guy out of the closet.
I know.
No.
So tell us your story.
Okay. This recording was done on an investigation at a formerly very famous restaurant in Malibu that had, all the celebrities were running there from the late 60s to the end of the 80s. And then it started going downhill. It was turned into kind of a nightclub after that. And then right before we went in, it had had a fire like 6 months before, and it burned the roof out. And so, the place was sort of there were places you couldn't walk, yellow tape. Yeah. And the owners were going to rehab it and, put it back in. So my friend Rob called me and said, "You want to go investigate this place?" And I thought, well, restaurant, it's kind of recent. It's been there only
And that's the kind of crazy
years.
Friends you need in the paranormal. Someone that calls you at midnight and goes,
So
"Do you
we're
want to go to a
investigating.
condemned building?"
And my friend Rob he's very manic when he investigates. He's an archaeologist and a historian, so he's like one of the other very interesting people. But he likes to do seances. So he sits everybody at a table and it has a bag of props. He's like, what's that comic with all
he's
the
the
props?
Carrot Top of
He's
Paranormal?
the Carrot Top of the Paranormal, except with black hair. And he doesn't smash shit. Well, he only smashes
That's
shit when he gets
Gallagher.
nervous. Yeah.
You're mixing metaphors.
But Rob gets really excited. Got to calm Rob down. But he does seances, and so we're going room to room, and so we're in this one room, and Rob loves the little devices too. All these people in the paranormal are so teched out, so they all there's a gadget guy who has like 500 things.
I know they
put
need
batteries
that
in
vest with 800 pockets.
Right. Shut up! I'm using my thing. And so Rob has on his phone, he's got this eye obelisk. And the obelisk is a device that was a separate device that was invented and sold to many people, 12, 15 years ago, where it supposedly reads fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. And the electromagnetic field is always fluctuating,
But it somehow puts out words.
But it has a dictionary, and so it randomly generates words. And so you'll hear this tinny voice go, "Blow.
Cat.
Douche." No, that's not in the dictionary. So it does that. So Rob is running this thing off his phone. It's a phone app. Okay, right. So he's doing this. So in this clip, you'll hear Rob is hearing the thing from his phone. He's saying this name. And then he says a second name. And then he says both names together. And then I make a comment. I make a joke. Because the names were Harold and Washington. And Harold Washington was a former mayor, a controversial mayor of Chicago back in the 80s, early 90s. And there was a vicious rumor went out that he wore women's dresses. In other words, he was a tranny. I don't think it was true, but
whatever, in that time
some artist
day,
did a painting of him, and it hung in Chicago, and there were
which,
riots.
oddly enough, now we have today a Democrat that's trans just won I can't remember where it was. But they won the election, which is actually an odd connection. You know what I mean? Like the change of time.
But it was a kind of a scandalous thing, and it wasn't really true. But he was mocked for it, and So I said Harold Washington. As I make a reference, and right as soon as I tell this joke, you hear this other voice come in. There were only three of us in the room when this is happening. Rob, myself, and this lady. So you hear this male voice come in and go, boo. So I got heckled by a ghost. So this is the clip. I'm going to play it twice.
And we figured this would be Harold, and he didn't think your joke was funny.
Or somebody else who didn't think it was funny.
Oh, right.
Maybe a friend.
Okay.
A donor.
Oh, wait, there's a motorcycle going by.
Maybe somebody who bought him dresses.
Yeah.
Who knows? But in any case, I'm going to play this twice. So, again, listen for the boo right after I tell this really bad joke.
Harold? Harold Washington? Or is there a Harry and a Washington?
You mean the former mayor of Chicago who dressed in women's clothes and...
Does that piss you off?
So you hear that boo.
Boo, yeah. I'm familiar with that sound.
I didn't pay $500 for this French meal to hear that crap.
All right, play it one more time.
Like Johnny Carson used to go there and stuff.
Oh.
Harold? Harold Washington? Or is there a Harry and a Washington?
You mean the former mayor of Chicago who dressed in women's clothes and...
Does that piss you off?
You know what else, though? It's what's hysterical about that is you never get an EVP of a ghost saying boo, like the stereotype. Like, it's very type. You know what I mean? He's going against type by saying that. Wow, that's really interesting. I wonder what that was.
Well, it brings up a final point that I want to emphasize, is that when you go on these investigations, you should really make an effort to stay positive, have fun, and joke around, and be positive and joke around, and you'll get much more evidence, guys, than if you're Mr.
Very serious,
very Sammy serious, going, this is serious, we must hush, and I will ask my questions, like, do you like pizza? Well,
right.
Victorian ghosts don't know quite how to answer that one.
And you know what else? Some of the best EVPs I've gotten has been during conversations where, they're listening to us. They're listening to you. And I remember me and Terry actually got yelled at once during an investigation for talking, and it was...
Oh, really?
They were so rigid. And but I really think it's more casual. When you get that, who do you want to talk to in real life? Do you want to talk to the cop that's ready to hit you with his stick all the time?
You get much more when you're talking than if you're asking them questions. When you ask questions, they tend to shy away.
Right.
And most people watching TV shows think they have to sit and ask questions for hours, and it's like, no, just record the whole damn thing and listen to it, and you'll get stuff. But as I like to say, we are their reality TV. Imagine if you're in this dark little place, you can't leave this house for whatever reason, and there are people around. So you're going to follow the people, Oh, gee, this is on again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, Dave, fascinating as always. Thanks for stopping by. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Harvey, where can they find you? Where can they reach out with their demonic stories?
No, don't give me those stories. Anyway, if I've got a website up, www.idigdeadpeople.weebly.com.
Weebly. Okay, so idigdeadpeople.weebly.
Weebly.
Okay, the double E would have thrown me.
Right. Or Weebly.
Weebly, and you have classes?
I sometimes teach paranormal classes. Anything that's current or coming up, I put up there. I give lectures. I've got a blog that gives information, like there's a whole blog on, don't mess with Ouija boards and other things, So, and I sometimes do private investigations. I don't have time to do everything that comes my way, but I respond to people and at least give them some advice and try and get them help. So.
Yeah, and if I don't know something, I go right to Dave. So that's
Karen talks to me quite often.
I do daily. All right, Dave Harvey, ladies and gentlemen.